You've been awake since 5 a.m., probably earlier. Your mind's been running. And before your feet have even touched the floor, you're thinking about the messages, the responsibilities, the people that are relying on you. There are probably a lot of things that could go wrong amidst everything that you're navigating. You may have been tempted to grab your phone, and doing so before you've arrived in your body. And so you just move and you run. Before 6 a.m. hits, you've probably taken on the world. There's this constant hum within your system. And it's if you can't switch off, you can't stop moving. And you get home and the work is still there. You're going to bed and the work is still there. And it's not that you're necessarily exhausted just from work. It's the fact that you just haven't been able to switch off and put that side of you to rest and give it an opportunity to just rejuvenate and to restore. And yes, maybe the things are moving. Maybe there's also progress that's been made. Maybe that's what you tell yourself. Because the more that we look at why performance breaks down, it's almost never about strategy. Why businesses break. It's almost never about the operations. It comes back to discipline and human psychology. And then I find underneath that, what actually comes up is it's never about this desire to achieve or wanting to improve or wanting to be better. It's actually the system that falls underneath that. It's the nervous system. And when it is functioning optimally and doing what it's designed to do, but you don't necessarily understand how modern day work, life, career actually affects that fundamental part of what makes you you and what allows your system to function in the way in which it does, then it becomes a problem. And there's a certain ask made by modern society around modern day achievement and the demands that it makes from you and your system. This video isn't a therapy session. It's not going to be a self-help conversation. It's really about being the missing explanation on why capable people burn out or why they feel wired and tired and why they sometimes find themselves feeling really drawn and just hollow internally. You get to a point where it looks great on paper, but the way that you're feeling just doesn't match what is happening on a day-to-day basis. And I've been there numerous times, and I've sat across a lot of people who have lived there for a long time as well. So what does the nervous system actually do? It is a response architecture. So what you find, the nervous system is always scanning, always reevaluating how it should respond to the current stimulus that is coming in. So in a high-performing scenario or environment, you'll find that tight deadlines, high stakes, or just a constant pressure being placed on a person ends up creating a low-grade level of stress, or you could even say threat. And it's not necessarily seen as an emergency, but you are lacking one of the fundamental pieces that the nervous system craves. Your entire system craves this, is safety. You don't feel safe. And this isn't weakness, this is just biology. And when you look at how the nervous system was designed, it was never meant to be in this alert-based state over a long period of time. And that pressure and that volume is what leads to the fatigue, the burnout, the underlying things and symptoms that most people can relate to who really try to push themselves beyond their limits. They don't necessarily understand how to switch themselves on and off consistently. So I want to show you this quick diagram here. And on here, you'll see that there's regulated, activated, and shut down. So this is pulled from polyvagal theory, but just so you can walk away with something that you understand and you can see and you can differentiate where you're sitting. Regulated is present, clear, decisive. It's able to think and to essentially feel simultaneously. And this is the ideal space where leadership, decision making, authentic expression lies. That's where you're in your power. Then you get to activate it. So this is when you're wired, there's an output that's been asked of you, and that's what's driving the behavior. So it looks like high performance from the outside, but there's an enormous cost on the inside. It's socially acceptable, but that's the state that most people get stuck in. It's this continuous activated state. And when you've lived in there for long periods of time, you then find yourself in the shutdown side of things, where there's this numbness, dissociation, or withdrawal that actually comes into play. And the tank is empty. Decisions feel impossible because you actually cannot think. Your entire system is not allowing you to think. It's in shutdown. And often this is seen as laziness and even depression. And the thing that most high performers end up experiencing is this oscillation between the two. So it's activation or activated state and this shutdown state. And this is the cycle. This is that feast and famine cycle. It's like, oh, I've given myself enough reprieve to jump back into this activated state and perform at incredible lengths and go to incredible heights, do all these amazing things. And you might even feel that it's sustainable on some level. But eventually the body crashes and it communicates with you and it gives you all these telltale signs whilst you're in there. But if you're unable to notice it, well, you end up just repeating the same mechanic. The thing is, like, why does this affect high performers specifically? And going through my own journey within this space, I used to perceive slowing down as being a threat. A threat to what I was building, a threat to what I was doing, a threat to all these external things, but more importantly, it was a threat to the identity that I was functioning from. And that was quite scary. When I looked at it from that perspective, it meant that my system never got an opportunity to recover. It was always going. It was looking for the next thing. It is always looking for this output-driven response. And the thing is, when you have come from a background where you're having to be on all the time to be good or to be great or to protect yourself from threats, well, that state ends up being a space of safety and control and certainty. And so we end up building ourselves around that. That makes it exceptionally difficult to unplug from that space and say, wow, this isn't sustainable. This isn't me. There must be another way for me to drive the same level of output and create similar outcomes without me having this back-end tax that comes into play when my body can't move anymore. So I found that there were 4 patterns that came up when I started to see this function of how I was doing things differently. And the first one was hypervigilance as leadership. Constantly scanning for what can go wrong, constantly being the pessimist. And it's so easily mistaken for diligence. And actually, it's the nervous system trying to distinguish between a genuine threat and the ordinary friction of building or doing something. And notice how it comes back again to the safety piece. You're looking for a sense of safety. And if you're unsure of what that looks like, or it feels so foreign to you, it's very difficult to recognize that this is where you're leading from. And then there's busyness. And we're using busyness as regulation, being running a business or a busy mess, as I like to say. So your calendar's full. And because there's this idea behind empty space being a bad thing. Empty space feels more dangerous to you than being overloaded with work. And with busyness, there's a deep connection to movement. And that movement is the only thing that keeps your anxiety from moving to a high and maintaining this low hum that just sits there, but it's manageable. You can work with that, and it keeps it below the surface, and it burns you out. That is just a telltale sign that you are just overstimulated. You are feeling under threat, and you are again in that activated state where you're just doing. And emotional distancing as a third pattern would tie in deeply to being perceived as being strong. So how this pattern actually comes up is people that are nearest and dearest to you typically don't get a lot of you. And it's not because you don't care. It's not because you don't want to be there. It's just that your system has learned over the years to deprioritize things that don't feel urgent. So if they're not under threat, I don't have to focus on that. But your business and your role and the things that you're busy doing and building, that feels like it's under threat. That feels like it needs your attention, and so it gets it. And this comes up so often in homes, and men struggle with this because this ties into stonewalling and ties into emotional vulnerability and things. But it's really, when we're looking at this as a high performing function, it makes a lot of sense. And this is one that I personally suffered from, the Sunday dread. It's Sunday and you should be resting, but you find it really difficult to rest. And more commonly than not, you find yourself more tired on a Monday because you have rested. And it's really that whole idea that you're not clear on what is safe and what is not. Work feels safe, doing things feels safe, moving feels safe. But sitting down, resting, allowing that activation loop to actually close itself, well, that feels horrible to you because it feels foreign. And it comes back to your system no longer remembers what true safety feels like. So we then move into the real cost of all of this. You've got a couple of patterns that are there. You've got the three different states that you get to embody, and two which is probably more prominent than not. And you dance between those two. And when we do break this down and look at it, what actually breaks because of these patterns and because of us staying in this continuous flux of shutdown and activation? There's three areas that I find that this really hits hard on. And the first one would be decision quality. When we look at decision quality, it's a dysregulated nervous system that essentially cannot access the prefrontal cortex. So that means that your strategic thinking, creative thinking, holding complex ideas without reacting doesn't exist. And because there's this continuous hum and there's this chronic activation that takes place, you don't have access to thinking differently and thinking out the box and holding this vision. So you're not performing at your best. Your thinking actually takes a massive hit because you don't feel safe and you don't have the resources. Your body isn't giving your prefrontal cortex the resources to actually do what it does best because you're in that flight, freeze, fawn response. We then look at the other part, which is, well, your relationships and being disconnected. But when we look at actual chemistry and your biological reality, I like to look at co-regulation. So when you're chronically dysregulated, what actually happens is you end up infecting the people around you. And so they become dysregulated. They pick up on those biological markers. Stress is essentially contagious, fun fact. And so you'll find your partner, your children are heightened, especially in your space. You might have picked it up from your partner. Things stirred up the minute you came back into play. That's normally a very clear reflection of this going on in your system and in your household. And lastly, the ceiling. So there is a very hard limit on how far nervous system dysregulation will carry you. So most people hit it somewhere when they are really successful and significant, and then there's this massive crash. They essentially see the next level, but they just don't have access to it. It's because they don't have the fuel to actually get there. And again, it comes back to, it's not strategy, it is the internal capacity needed to match that external ambition. That's what's been asked of you, but you just don't have what you need to get there. So now I want to invite you to go back to that 5 a.m. wake up. Your feet haven't touched the floor yet. And your mind has possibly been running all night, or you woke up and the first thought you have is that meeting or that presentation or that decision or that difficult conversation or that fire that you've been having to fix over the last couple of weeks. And it feels urgent. That impulse to grab your phone and to start fixing and start doing something. And notice that there's a pause there that you can install in that moment before the day starts running away from you, before you start running away from yourself. And the honest question that I want to bring into the space would be, not are you necessarily performing, but what is that level of performance and output actually costing you? And more importantly, does that cost still make sense? And thank you again for taking the time to watch, listen, and to ideally take something with you that you get to see yourself a little bit more clearly. And a question that I have for you, and you feel free to drop this in the comments, is, which one of the 4 patterns landed most for you? What spoke to you the most? And feel free to share. And if you want to dive a little bit deeper, there's a capacity assessment in the link below or on my website, frequencycoaching.com/assessment, where you can dive a little bit deeper into where you're leaking energy, power, and capacity. It takes about 3 minutes, and it's a clear diagnostic with next steps. Trust that you have the ability to make a different decision and in turn make the shift. Catch you in the next episode. Cheers.